This next video series has to do with differences between quantitative and qualitative research. First of all, if we look at an overall description or difference between these two issues, is quantitative research has to do with gathering a lot of information from a lot of people, but it's very general information, but you know a lot about a whole lot of people. The second type has to do, which is qualitative, is you have a very small group of people, but you learn a whole lot about them. You have a document in the folders for this class called Quantitative versus Qualitative, and it just kind of gives a general overview of the differences between these. There's a lot of sampling. You have large groups of people in quantitative. You have some kind of instrument that you're using or a way of gathering information that turns into statistical data. As opposed to qualitative is we have a very small group of people that are a whole lot alike. We're trying to learn a great deal of information through open-ended questions and interviews about the information, about the aspects that we're interested in. It really becomes more about one specific concept within a small group of people, and we learn a whole lot about it. The other big difference between these two is you really cannot generalize from a very small group of people beyond that group, as opposed to a quantitative where you can do that. You can survey all the fifth graders, or a large portion of the fifth graders, and be able to determine something about all fifth graders. The difference is with these fifth graders is we may not know a whole lot about that information that we're generalizing to. So they both have different aspects to them, and they both have their place in research. The difference between experiment and non-experimental research, and this is going specifically to quantitative, is experiments have treatments, non-experiments don't. Experiments have a experimental group and a treatment group. Non-experimental research doesn't. They tend to have one group. If in your experiment, let's say for example you have one class that you're studying, and you have an experimental group and a control group. If those groups are not randomly assigned, then it's called quasi-experimental research. It's still not true experimental research if you don't have a random assignment of a treatment group and a control group and a way of measuring differences between the two. Which are better? Well, experiments are always better because that way you can isolate the independent variable between the two and determine whether or not that's really what's having an effect. However, sometimes you have to do the best you can with what you've got. If things are designed well, and all other things being equal, if you've done an experiment, then you'll be able to say that that treatment that you provided caused an effect on the dependent variable. Some things that you have to take in consideration with experiments is ethics. I have a question here that says, does spanking cause increased levels of anger in adulthood? It would be unethical to have a group of parents that spanks their kids and have another group of parents that doesn't, and have them spend the child's entire growing up period, one group spanking their kids and the other one not, and seeing what effects it has on their adulthood. The way you do that ethically is you ask people about their experiences in regard to spanking, and whether or not they have anger in their adulthood. You ask adults about that. Were you spanked as a child? And then start comparing that to levels of anger. Another ethical issue is withholding treatment. If you have an experimental group and a control group and you provide the treatment to one, and it really makes a big difference, then you have a ethical responsibility to provide that treatment to the control group after the experiment's over with. And that happens a lot in schools. If we have a program that works very, very well, we want to provide that program to the control group also. When you're studying quantitative research, it is very important that you look at the validity and the reliability of how they have gathered their information. And we spent a lot of time talking about validity and reliability, so I'm going to assume that we really get that. In your book on page 50, and when I say book, I mean the PDF files that I sent you, it talks about the one researcher who used a forced choice questionnaire and another who used checklist. This brings in the validity issue of concurrent validity. And really what we're trying to get at with this is you as a researcher being able to read literature reviews and analyze it, and despite the fact that these two people used different instruments, they came up with the same answers. That's good validity. So when you're writing your lit review, it's important that you look at those differences in terms of how did they gather their data, were there differences in it, did the differences exist because there really was a difference in people's perception or how they felt about something, or did it have to do with the instrument, which in this case it didn't have anything to do with the instrument. It had to do with how they gathered their data. When you're writing your lit review, it's very important that you don't get into a routine of saying this author says this author says that. You want to compare and contrast the authors. The question is non-random sampling bad? Convenience sampling, that is to say. No, it's not bad. It's what has to be done sometimes. And as I've said before, we can accept anything as long as we're open and honest about what we're taking. What makes up for it? Well, strong participation rates. If you have 100% participation in your convenience sample, your non-random sample, that really does make for a stronger study. This issue about the college sophomores and rats, well, it's often said that in psychology we know more about college sophomore and lab rats than anything else because we have a convenience sample of them. When you start doing your research, you'll have more than likely have a convenience sample that you're going to have access to, and you're going to learn a whole lot about that one small group. When you're doing the lit reviews, it's important that you get demographics because that helps us to paint a picture to the reader about what you're trying to generalize to. So we need to know a lot of information about the specific group that you have. When you're looking at these research articles, it's important to know that significance is like pregnancy. There is no almost. Either you have significant results in a study or you don't. So when you're doing the lit review articles, you'll see a lot of information referred to about approaching significance. It's okay to discuss that in the context of limitations. This is also called practical significance. But when it comes down to it, it has to be either significant or it's not, meaning that there really is something that occurred or there isn't. In regard to these practical significance, what they're saying is, had I controlled for other issues, maybe a different results would be found. But the problem is there's a chance that maybe not. So this issue, and this goes back to the 0.05 issue of when you're looking at your lit reviews, you have to be sure to keep track of that. And if there are non-significant results, it's okay to report them. Just make sure that you indicate that in your lit review. And lastly, keep in mind that every study that you review will have problems with it. Every study is flawed. And when you do yours, remember that proofs are in whiskey and geometry, not empirical research. If you set out to prove something, you've already have skewed the way that you look at it, and you're going to get strange results. That ends the video on quantitative research. We'll also have a video on qualitative research.